Hi there, welcome back. This is Alex Salas, and you are listening to Stellar Origins, the podcast in which we take a look at the connections between history and instructional design, corporate training, so we can enrich our practices today and better them for tomorrow. Today is a special episode. We're going to talk about the quintessential instructional design or instructional systems development process known as ADDIE and the model that made it a reality. There is a confusion between ADDIE being a model or being a process, and it's really an engineering process. There is an instructional systems development model known as the IPISD. That stands for Interservice Procedures for Instructional Systems Development. It was developed by the Center for Educational Technology at Florida State University, and the principal investigator there was Robert K. Branson, Dr. Robert K. Branson. Unfortunately, Dr. Branson passed away 2 years ago, and I had the opportunity and the privilege to interview him. He was residing in Mexico at the time, in 2020. And we got some great information from that interview, which inform my research here, but I've taken a deep dive in this episode, and we have some interesting connections that perhaps not many people are aware of. Why do we need to look at ADDIE, and why does an instructional designer need to know ADDIE? Well, ADDIE is the instructional design model that define all other models. Although you may see models after ADDIE, everything after ADDIE pretty much applies the process of ADDIE. So the IPISD, what's special about the IPISD is the converge many legendary talents and organizations, from private practice to academics, psychologists. So it was multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. The assistant investigators or researchers for Mr. Branson appear to be Barry M. Wagner and Gail T. Rayner. This is coming from the final report of the IPISD, released in 1977, which was Task 5 final report, and bears the title of the model. In the model, 5 phases are established. Those 5 phases are analyze, as you know, and that involves the model of input, processes, and outputs. So IPO, inputs, processes, and outputs. That means you're collecting an input, a set of data. There's a process that provides an output, and that output is the desired instruction. If you translate this to being an instructional designer, there is a need, there is a process, and you are going to provide the result for that need, to cover that need. So if you read the IPISD model, you'll have the phases identified, and each phase will tell you exactly what is concerned with those phases. For example, in the analyze, we talked about the input, processes, and outputs, and the tasks. And the tasks are very important, because what that means is you're not just talking to a subject matter expert and taking their word for it. You want to do an analysis of the jobs. You want to also take a look, you want to do observations of those jobs, and you want to talk to the people doing the jobs, not just the person that is considered to be the expert doing that job. In the design phase, there's discussion of establishing terminal learning objectives. How many times have you learned or heard about terminal learning objectives? Those have a specific requirement. It stresses the audience, the behavior, conditions, and degree of performance that is expected in relation to the task. So it's not just listing an enabling objective, which is the notion that we have today of, at the end of the scores, you will, and do an action verb and then put a statement on it, and that's it. It's the terminal learning objective that is made for the designer to really know the scope and the expectations based on the task to be performed. The develop phase, which is the third phase, is not just about making materials or making training content. It's preparing the audience, preparing the students, and doing that. So, I mean, if you read through the phases, it really gives you a complete detail of what needs to happen. But then it also gives you notions of how to do it. So the blocks, there are blocks for each phase, and this could be considered steps in each phase. And this all tells you the what, right? So on the analyze or the analysis stage or phase, you want to analyze the job, select the task and functions, construct the job performance measures, JPMs, analyze the existing courses, and select instructional settings. A lot of people, you know, what happens today is that you have people coming to you as an instructional designer and just telling you exactly what they want already. Hey, we want a new learning course. Hey, we want an ILT. We want a VILT. Well, that should not be defined up front. That is not the way it should be done. You should be doing an analysis first and then determining what the outcome or the output will be. The design phase tells you about the developing of objectives, developing tests right behind those objectives. A lot of people consider that the Dick and Carry model is the model that tells you that, and that is not correct. Again, the IPISD is the model that influences all the other models that thereafter. Describe the entry behaviors. That is to be able to describe what people should be able to do and know before they even engage in instruction, and determine the sequence and structure as well. You have on the phase 3, which is your development, you want to specify the learning events and the activities. This is where the curricular piece comes in. And a lot of people, at least I've seen some educators on LinkedIn talk about that the instructional design does not cover curriculum design or activity design. And that is exactly what the development phase deals with. It's not only about materials. It's not only about putting a course together. It's those things, and also validating that instruction against the objectives. The implementation side, you have a plan. You have a management plan for it. In other words, where is it going to go? What's going to do? What medium is going to be used in terms of, you know, the platforms that are going to be needed. So this is about the dependencies because it's systemic in conducting the instruction. And as we discussed before, that control phase or the evaluation phase has more than just an external evaluation, meaning how your course did or whatnot. So you have the outcomes of each of those blocks on a list in this document. It tells you exactly what are the things, what are the examples of those, what are the examples of those outcomes there. And so it's worth the read. It's definitely something that everyone should be knowing about. Should be something that you should be applying blindly to anything. Maybe not, because the authors even recognize that, look, this is not something that can be applied to any instructional setting, but it definitely applies to many. Now, we know that we are discussing ADDIE, and when did ADDIE actually become what it is? It's hard to say, but there's some evidence here of what it is. When did it actually become ADDIE? Because it wasn't originally ADDIE. Being that it was a systems engineering process, the last stage or the last phase, I tend to say stage because that's how I learned it. The last phase was actually called control. And the control stage, which most people know as evaluation, includes the evaluation and revision of instruction that is carried out by personnel. The purpose of this model was to advance and improve Army instruction in schools, in all the service schools. And this is why this model is very important, because it's not an academic model. It's actually a model. The IPISD is a model that was created to improve instruction in schools, in military schools, which directly align to jobs. And if you think of it, if you work in the private sector today, that's exactly what you're doing. You're creating instructional environments, instructional settings to improve performance in the workplace. Now, if you Google ADDIE today, you're going to find many criticisms, or you're going to find many observations that are not exactly accurate. And they're really more efforts from some vendor or from that person, either out of ignorance, meaning not knowing, or what I call purposeful ignorance, which is to sort of dismiss its value and portray that person's idea or model or process over it. And that has been seen in recent books. 10 years ago, in the book Leaving ADDIE for Sam, Dr. Michael Allen writes in there some comments that, you know, it pretty much reflects what the industry seems to repeat often. And one of those, if I take a look real quick on the book, if we go to page 19 of Leaving ADDIE for Sam, you will find, you know, several notes in there as to that it's linear, that it doesn't work, it can't be implemented the right way, and that can be true because many people that are saying or reporting these things don't really know or didn't really follow what it is, besides the fact that this book calls it a model all the time. And also that if I quote here on page 19, he will say, we have seen ADDIE to serve some organizations well. Typically, however, ADDIE appears to fall short. While ADDIE must be appreciated for what it's done in the past, let it no longer be the source of boring and outdated instructional products it so often leads to. Let it no longer dictate a process that is simply too slow, laborious, and ineffectual. It's time to move on. Surely we can get comfortable with a new process once again. So obviously a clear statement there just to pretty much tell you, hey, my stuff is better than this, so follow Sam. Sure. The other example of this will be the book on, I believe it's Learning Design Clusters by Owens and Kadeckia, and they also go out of their way to diminish the value of ADDIE, pointing out all these criticisms. There are criticisms, of course. There are some valid criticisms. Actually, if you read the IPISD report, Dr. Branson actually points out what could be some of the limitations there. And the limitations for ADDIE were actually the limitations that you can find on anything else. Like today in your company, for example, let's say if you work in a private company, or if you work in education, someone designs some kind of program to revamp your instructional design processes. And then they, you know, let's say this decision is made as a program, they might include you into it or whatnot. It's going to be a change management issue. And that's exactly what happened with many military folks. Not only that the IPISD has some weaknesses in the sense that it missed those change management factors. People, you know, at the time, we're talking about some military enlisted folks, instructors, they had experience with Vietnam, coming back from Vietnam or not. And at the time, the reason why the Army came up with this regulation for a new systems-based system engineering instructional model was because at the time, education, military instruction wasn't as effective because it was based just on subject matter experts. That's right. So just instructors, they had experience from doing the job and training people on how they thought they needed to train. So that's a key component here. The key purpose of this is to really identify what people need to know and not, and you know, exclude the whole nice to know stuff. And this is all portrayed in the summary report. The last reason why ADDIE perhaps was not as well as, it was criticized so much, or not as accepted, is because of the bandwagon effect. And this is a phenomenon that we know that happens in academia and happens in other places, especially in the industry. In learning and development, you see this every year, right? I mean, if you think about it, some people have criticized microlearning. And microlearning obviously doesn't really come from any substantial research thing. It's just an idea that came across and people ran with it, and then now people are going, well, microlearning is whatever. It's not really. So in the beginning, everybody gets excited, everybody recognizes the value of things, and then after some level of implementation, then people start talking against it, and then they modify it. But there's an interesting thing here, because again, we keep talking about ADDIE, and the actual process was ADDIC. And that is because it was an engineering process. Control, actually, by the conversation that I had with Mr. Branson, Dr. Branson, control was meant to be quality control and continuous improvement. And that is an engineering process. So in other words, we identify what we want to do, we design an approach, we develop that approach, we implement it, and then we evaluate it. There are 3 components in the evaluation of that, and that's what control is. You have to do an internal evaluation, an external evaluation, and also revise your system. So it's not only do a formative evaluation on every stage or throughout the learning experience, knowing how people are doing, how well things are going, if they're achieving the actual standards established by the learning objectives. It's also doing an internal evaluation as to whether the instructor delivered at the level or standard that was expected, or if the learning was designed at that perspective. So in other words, if the training product met the requirements that were meant to be achieved. And aside from that, so that's your internal evaluation. And then if you have the system revision, would actually entail that the learning leadership and the learning managers would be revising and implementing improvements based on the data collected from those evaluations. So when did ADDIC become ADDIE? According to Dr. Branson, this happened because the academic world didn't really roll with the whole control thing, and evaluation was the most common term. There is a document I found here that was published in 1993. It's called Prepare the Army for War, a historical overview of the Army Training and Doctrine Command. And in that document by John L. Romjue, I hope I'm not butchering that name, but it's Romjue, Susan Kennedy, and Ann W. Chapman, is celebrating the TRADOC or TRADOC, which is the Training Doctrine Command. And that is the Army's Training and Doctrine Command, is what the Continental Army Command became, originally known as CONARC. It's now, since 1973, was TRADOC. And in that document, there is mention of General William Depuy, I believe it's Depuy. Yeah. So the change of this command came because, as stated in the document, page 21, when Depuy and Gorman came to TRADOC, soldiers and officers were trained according to the Army Training Program, or ATP, which had been in use since World War I. So obviously there was a need for innovation, a need for revision, a need for improvement. ATP was a time-oriented process that prescribed how many hours will be devoted to each subject and task. That training program obviously could not be as effective if it was just based on a specific set of hours that people needed to learn without any proper analysis. And one key quote here from Mr. Depuy is the ATP was based on the availability of conscripts and on the assumption that the United States, with its ocean barriers, will have sufficient time to raise, equip, and train a combat force if necessary. In other words, the Army is now looking to have people have military readiness, people trained, ready to go whenever conflict appears, rather than having to do this. And these are lessons, obviously, learned from World War I, World War II, as we've seen in the other episodes with training within industry and the Emergency Fleet Corporation, which were not directly military instruction, but very close and related. So his Major General Paul F. Gorman pretty much make a big statement that the Army needed was, what the Army needed at the time was a train, evaluate, train program. That means you train, you evaluate, and you train, meaning you do something, evaluate, and then do it again. You do it better. And that's what led to this release of an organization, and it was all based on the systems approach to training. At that point, they mentioned that the SAT, or Systems Approach to Training, consisted of 5 interrelated phases: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. This is when ADDIE gets named for the first time. So you recognize some of the names that I'm going to mention here that were involved in the review or in forming the research for the IPISD and what became ADDIE. And obviously that is Robert Gagne. The learning hierarchies of Robert Gagne from 1968 were in use. The Conditions of Learning, which is one of the most essential book in instructional design, or at least in learning, for learning purposes, and the psychology of learning was also involved. And we have Mathematics as well from Thomas Gilbert. So those were involved. And then Robert Mager, of course, goal analysis in terms of the analysis of goals and the creation of objectives. Mastery learning from Benjamin Bloom was another concept that was in play, and instructional systems by Bella Banathy. Bears to mention that in 1968, Bella Banathy published Instructional Systems, and that was the adaptation of systems-based approach to education, in other words, in academia, for instructional developers. So very rich background, very strong background. And the reason I'm mentioning all these things is because we have to recognize then that ADDIE is not just a superficial 5 phases, analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate, and that's it. It's not just an acronym, which is another thing that a lot of people say. It's just an acronym. It's just an acronym telling you what to do, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. That is completely wrong. The IPISD tells you exactly what to do and how to do it. And the issue with this is that you have to remember that the IPISD was developed for a large organization with thousands of people. You are not part of an organization with thousands of people. You may be, depends on what company you're working with. But one of the key components here is that do you have the support or leadership to analyze tasks? What happens today is not usually conducive to do that. And that's all part of the organizational structure of the company and how you have the ability to do so in the workplace. It has nothing to do with the model you're using or the process you're using. If you can't be allowed to question, to determine whether something is needed or not, whether training can be based on job tasks and not just someone's expertise or what someone thinks is needed for doing work, then you will never be able to do anything no matter what process you're doing with. What I can tell you is that other models that are brand new are just based on content development, and content development is not really solving any problems. You're just creating stuff and hoping that someone can get some benefit out of it. Another important thing about this process, the IP and the ADDIE process and IPISD, is that it's not in any way referring to the Kirkpatrick's model for evaluation. It's focusing on the evaluation of those tasks using either formative or summative evaluation models, which are models that were developed in the 60s for educational purposes, improving the way education was conducted or evaluated. So the evolution of what we have today documented in the IPISD was a direct influence from Robert Gagne in terms of the systems development, which he noted in his book, Psychological Principles in System Development, published in 1962. That then coincides with the release of the Army in 1968 of this regulation that we talked about with Cornard. And that regulation pretty much stated seven phases of the process. Robert Branson took those 7 phases and did an interpretation of them based on the improvements that it needed to do, because the main problem with the regulation that the Army put out is that the Army didn't get any adoption from the military instructors. And that is because the regulation just told people what to do. So the reason why Robert Branson was hired, contracted, this is a military contract, and the team was to improve that regulation and to make it into a prescriptive and descriptive model and process to follow. So ADDIE is or ADDIC originally, is a simplification of that big process that took them about 5 years to develop. And that's why we have it today. Now, what you have today, of course, is diluted. If you just read blogs or if you go to conferences or if you just talk to people that have not performed instructional systems design in a capacity working with the military or the federal government. So I hope this clears out many of the doubts that you may have about the ADDIE process. And I really recommend that whether you're going to practice it or not, you really understand what the implications are and the influence and the power of the Interservice Procedures for Instructional Systems Design brings to the practice of instructional design. Thank you for listening to Stellar Origins, and subscribe. Make sure you can also go to our page on Anchor and leave a message if you have any more information, or if you like to leave some perspective of what you learned or any ideas that you have regarding this episode.